found a small little startup in San Francisco with no investors, profitable business. We went from a couple of hundred customers to well over 1,500 customers in a year.
A profitable business in San Francisco
right?
without investors. Without investors.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. That sounds crazy.
That doesn't happen today. That was back then. Hey everyone, this is Heini and Zachariassen here, and welcome to Founders Weekly, where we tell startup stories you can learn from. Today we're going to talk about something that's both exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking. Exit strategy. Specifically, we're diving into how to build a startup to sell it quickly for millions of dollars. This is not typically how I build companies or my co-host, but it is a strategy that's worked for a lot of people. And today we're going to explore how it's done. We will have a guest on that has done this many, many times. My co-host today is Theis, Vivino co-founder and a friend. Welcome, Theis.
Thank you so much, Heine. Looking forward to it.
Yes, this should be fun, right? I mean, interesting subject. So let's get some initial thoughts on this just to get us started here. What is your idea about building something for an exit? And you can go quick reply here. Or you can do whatever.
Well, listen, exits are nice, right? Who doesn't like an exit? And honestly, you and I, let's face it, we haven't been good at exits. So actually,
that's why we're doing the podcast.
That's why we're doing the podcast, and I really look forward to talking to Henrik today, our guest, because I think there's a lot to learn.
But I'm going to poke you a little bit more there, because how do you feel about designing something for an outcome? Would you be passionate about that? Do you think that's interesting? I just want to, see how you feel about that, because that's not what we've done.
Well, I don't think there's an inherent conflict between being passionate about something like a product or a company that you're building and then building it towards an exit. And I think, as Henrik will probably highlight today, there are a lot of positive kind of side effects of it. You need to focus on the business model. You need to focus on creating real value. So I think there's a lot of good things there. Of course, you and I, we've had success in building a company where, you could say if we build it towards an exit, it's an exit that is like an IPO or something like that. It's not necessarily an acquisition, and we haven't really focused on that from the beginning. And I think you need to distinguish between like building something with an exit in mind, and then working on the exit. Right? I think working on the exit is like, that's the really dangerous part, where you can really, take your hands off the steering wheel, and then, the car crashes while you try to type in the destination on the GPS. So we kind of know that could be a really dangerous thing for founders and the team, because that's a defocus. But I think what Henrik is actually talking about is having it as a focus all the way through, as a kind of a North Star in certain decisions. And having a fixed North Star is always a good idea.
It's always good, yeah. But you said something. You said, hey, it's about creating value. And obviously doing a startup is about creating value. I think our mindset's always been about creating value for our users or buyers, whoever. But is there a chance that you're thinking a different way, because now I'm just creating value for a potential acquirer?
I think there is, and I know, looking into the future a bit, I know Henrik is maybe going to talk about, it's important to have a real business model from day one, and I think that's right, and I think it's a point, because that is one of the dangers of having a focus in mind, that actually you don't ensure that you have a business model in mind, because you want to be rolled up into something bigger, for example. Yeah. So maybe you're not too worried about your unit economics or your customer acquisition cost, because you know that those are going to work differently anyways once you're inside the big tent.
But then you risk of becoming really fragile if you don't have a business model.
Yes, right. So if the sale doesn't go through, or you run out of time or something, then that suddenly becomes a huge liability, because you didn't kind of build that from day one. So I think that's part of why it's kind of one of Henrik's points, that you really need to make sure, if you do this, you still need to make sure that you have a business model that makes sense, that you can make a profitable company, so that you're in charge of your own destination.
100%. So there's some research here, and according to MBroker, around 30% of all US seed-funded startups manage to achieve an exit, either through acquisition or going public. Or only around 10% end up with an exit over 50 million. And the price that you sell for, if you design for an exit, really, and again, he's going to talk about that too, because obviously you can't be too ambitious if you're looking for a quick exit, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are these stats about how big these exits are, right? And they are on the small side. But if you are a founder and you have a significant share in a company, if you exit it at $30-50 million, that's still going to be probably a life-changing amount for you. Exactly. So it can make so much sense for as the individual founder.
So when our guest comes on, we've talked about this and prepared really well. He's going to talk about 5 different tactics when it comes to building for an exit. And before he comes on, I want to bring up one of those tactics just to poke you a little bit here and see what you think about that. Maybe you can speak freely before he gets on. So that particular tactic is saying that VCs are friends, meaning that when you do this, you basically cannot use VCs. And again, this is opposite to what we've done and what sort of traditionally people think in the startup economy. Hey, you maybe have some angels, you get seed, and you get some VC, and then you build it, right? And he says, no, we're not going to do that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, of course, it sounds weird to our ears because we are so deep in the VC soup, and
we think that's the only model. Yeah,
we think that's the only model, right? So it's refreshing to get an outside perspective. And listen, I think you and I, we have a lot to thank VCs for, especially the ones that invested in our companies, right? We literally couldn't have done it without them. By design, we've built companies that needed VCs and that fit into that model. I think in our case, most of the time VCs are our friends. But Henrik has a super interesting and very valid point here regarding the size, right? And it's back to what you said about the exit size, that what can be a super interesting exit for you as an individual founder or founding team can be a completely uninteresting exit for a VC. And they would actually rather see you go for the really big thing and fail than take what in their eyes is a small win and not important win. And so you suddenly you have a situation there where you're misaligned with the VCs. And I think that's what Henrik will get into. For you and I, VCs have been pretty great
friends
on helping us. Yeah,
for sure. And then also on that note, we're also going to talk about, okay, so you and I have built a B2C company, which was free for a very, very long time. And was also very costly to develop. How do you do that without some kind of actually quite substantial investment, right? So this particular strategy he's going to talk about, let me guess again, probably limits from doing B2C at all, almost. Well, at least free B2C. They're paid B2C. You can.
Yes, but even within that, acquisition targets become a lot smaller. The pool of companies that could be interested in buying
less predictable, right?
Yes, much less predictable success for it's a much higher risk on the consumer side. Building the company, fewer companies are interested in buying it, especially in the environment we have today, where there's so much regulatory scrutiny around acquisitions. So it's much tougher, I think, in the B2C space, and that's also why Henrik's playbook probably focuses on B2B.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're going to dig deeper into these strategies when we bring our guest on after the break. Stay tuned for the chat with Henrik Rosendahl, entrepreneur who successfully exited multiple startups. Okay, we are back. Our guest today is Henrik Rosendahl, an experienced entrepreneur who has successfully exited 5 startups. Welcome to Founders Weekly, Henrik.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So let's start with a quick overview. You've been involved in 11 startups, right? And I'm not saying you should go through all of them, but you've exited 5 of them.
Yep.
And I mean, very, very few people have managed to do 5 exits in their entire lifetime. Obviously, you're a very young man still, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I have been super fortunate to exit my startups with a collective value of more than $250 million. And the first one started out great, right? And then you sort of you're like, oh, I can do this again, and then you run into trouble along the way, and then all of a sudden there's another success story, and it's sort of you can't win them all, right? But a 50% batting average is pretty good.
That's very good.
Very impressive.
So I want to ask you about that, right? Because we're going to talk about the strategy now that you have, which is sort of boiled down, and we're talking about these 5 tactics or 5 lessons.
Yeah.
But were you burned at some point to begin with? Because sometimes when you sort of know, look, I'm not going to do that ever again. We're not going to. Is there a story before that you don't talk about? So let's hear that.
No, I mean, look, it was on the contrary, actually. The first one turned out great. We were just a bunch of very young, naive engineering students in the dormitory kitchen, literally. Creating some software, and long story short, we end up selling it to a company in Chicago. I'm 25 at this point. I pocketed $1 million and a green card, and off I went. Right, and so then you're.
I heard you won the green card in the lottery, though. I will say that.
Well, yeah. So it's actually very fortunate to get a green card because I never finished my engineering degree, which means I don't have a bachelor's degree, which means that it's really, really hard to get a work permit in the United States. But that's for another episode. But we were sort of larger than life, right? We were young and overconfident, and on to the next venture. So I took all my money I just made and invested it in this new thing, and the .com crash happened, and all my money sort of vaporized in front of me, right? And so that humbles you, and you sort of start thinking about what's next. And that was in Boston, by the way. So I decided that it was time to move back to Denmark again after six years or something abroad, and got myself into a startup with a massive founder problem. Not only a product problem, but a founder problem. And I was sort of the incoming CEO and ill-equipped to handle it. Also, I missed the United States, so I was sort of quickly getting out of there again. But it taught me a lesson that to this day I will attribute to some of the success. Namely, there comes a time where you need to ask yourself if you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
This is different when you are the technical founder, or this is your baby and there is no plan B. But if you're coming in as an incoming CEO or otherwise being hired, at some point you have to be like, no, I'm going to throw the towel in the ring and get on with the show. This is waste of my time. And that's not something that the VCs want to hear, right? They want you to sort of like tough it out. But you also have to think about yourself and your own life and family and whatnot. And so that brought me right back to the United States, where my green card was literally burning a hole in my pocket, and found a small little startup in San Francisco with no investors and a profitable business that was super exciting. We went from a couple of hundred customers to well over 1,500 customers in a year, and ended up selling it to VMware, which is now Broadcom, ironically.
A profitable business in San Francisco
without
investors. Without investors. That sounds amazing. That sounds crazy.
That doesn't happen today. That was back then.
So let's talk about that a little later. But there is something about having a founder and a team and a product that is 100% focused on the customer. And there is no time for any fluffy strategies. There is just the next customer and the next invoice and the next payment, right? And so while that will hamper some growth potential, it will also keep you very focused on getting the product right. And when you only have 2 developers, right? One is developing code and the other one is testing and releasing. You got to be fairly selective about what you do. But that was... And
this was a decent sized startup exit, right?
There was a very decent exit, in fact. And with 4 shareholders, we're good. We're good. And so I saw everything, right, from the early days with early venture, the big failures of the dot-com crash, to you could actually run a real business here, and get
Even in San Francisco.
money out of it. Yeah, in San Francisco.
Okay, so you want to take us through like just a couple more of the exits, just real quickly before we get into the lessons, because I think we're kind of ready for the lessons. And I'm assuming sort of every one of these has sort of taught you something, right?
Yeah, I mean, no question, right? The self-funded one was it was frustrating because we didn't have the growth capital, right, to really hire, because we had the product, sort of a product market fit, right? It was just a matter of, more money in the marketing machine, and we could get more customers and more invoices out. But on the other hand, when it comes to an exit, we sold this for just shy of $50 million. That's a lot of money when there's nobody else to share it with, right? And so that taught me the lesson of sit down with a spreadsheet and optimize it for yourself and your co-founders and your family, right? So many startups are just marching to the VC drum. I mean, it's a little sort of ironic, right, that the smartest people on the planet are just drinking the Kool-Aid, as opposed to like, yo, wait a minute, what's good for me, right?
Yeah, Theis, I know you have a comment.
No, it's super interesting. And in that startup that didn't have any VC money, and you say you did realize that it was kind of hampering your growth. So was it a conscious choice, even in that one, to not get VC money in, or was it based out of necessity, or what's the story?
I mean, it all happened sort of at the same time as the point where we got big enough to go out and actually raise a serious round of funding. It so happened that Microsoft had just acquired our only real competitor up in Boston.
And back then they went to Microsoft to die, right?
Well, yeah, and Microsoft and VMware at the time were sort of in an arms race for a virtualization platform, right? And we had a sort of an important little piece for the application layer as opposed to the operating system layer. And so Microsoft bought our competitor, and VMware came back to the table. And again, right, if you don't have VC money, $50 million, that's a life-changing event. Mind you, I just lost all my money on prior startups, so it was nice to get sort of the bank account refueled, right? But we were obviously thinking about, should we raise some money? We had like Intel Capital sort of circling the wagon, and blah, blah, blah. But we were also unsure where this was going to go with Microsoft buying our competitor. They're known to just put it into the operating system and give it away for free. At which point we would be dead in the water, right? More or less.
Yeah.
And so there was a timing issue, and then you have choices, right? When you don't have investors to think about, but really only what's good for you.
Amazing. Okay, we're gonna sneak in the other exits later, but let's begin with the first lesson here. And the first one we have is begin with the end in mind. And this is like, it doesn't get more specific on when you build for an exit. That's, I guess, exactly what you're saying here. What does that mean to you, Henrik?
I think, obviously if it's your first startup, you don't really understand that most, and this pertains to sort of enterprise software, right? Specifically, but you don't understand that you have to coexist with an infrastructure that's already in place. And the last thing a customer wants to hear is that they have to like re-architect the whole thing to let you through the door, right? That's you're dead on arrival. And so you need to figure out what's your role in this world. What problem do I solve, and who are the players around me that I need to sort of integrate to, coexist with, et cetera, et cetera. And the funny thing is, most customers will tell you, right? Here is what our infrastructure looks like. You're solving this piece of the puzzle. I want you to integrate to these three other platforms for me to have a coherent experience. And so it's ironic that a lot of companies are sort of thinking about strategic partnering on the back end, right? It really should be on the front end, because you have to work with these, other entities, and why not figure it out? Give them a call, call up VMware, call up Microsoft, call up Cisco, and say, hey, we just finished an implementation at your customer with our product, and it all works neatly together. There's a good chance that they will invite you over for a cup of coffee. If nothing else, they're curious, right? But you never know what's on their Christmas wish list, right? If you talk to the VP of Corp Dev in any of these big companies, is they have a wish list of technologies and competencies on their whiteboard. And you could be lucky that you hit it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So something there I'm thinking about often when I talk to some smaller startups, and they're looking for product market fit. So they're developing their product. They're looking for the product market fit, and they, as good startup founders, they go out and they work closely with their customers,
right,
and they listen to the customers, and they change. And quite often we have this conversation where they're getting really deep in the weeds with a specific customer, and I tend to say, hey, be careful, because you might end up kind of in this consulting role where you're just solving a very specific problem for this one customer, and you forgot about the market, right? You forgot to make a product rather than be a feature with them. But you're saying that this could actually work in certain situations. So just enlighten me there. What is it? What isn't that I'm getting wrong here?
Well, I don't think you're getting anything wrong. I think it's just a matter of balancing the two, right? So you don't end up being a consulting company, and that you have the guts to say no if this is going down a path that is just too custom for this customer, right? I mean, you see this all the time. Healthcare, defense, banking, finance, right? Their infrastructures are multi-galactic, right? And so you end up getting sucked into this and never to be seen again, right? So you should probably ask yourself, is this the right, is this the right?
Does anyone else run it like this? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And does this replicate to other industries, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a balance. Of course, it's a balance. On the other hand, if it does, then go right ahead.
Right? Yeah. And I think also, Henrik, I think I'm going to be quoting you from something you said in the past of making sure you solve a small problem in a big market, rather than a big problem in a real. And that's kind of the same here. You can go in and you might solve a really big problem, but if it's only that one customer, you haven't really built a business.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You might have built a consulting, business inadvertently, right? But the other thing ties to that comment. I keep reminding founders, sometimes much to their dismay, that they need to solve a hard problem, right? They need to solve something that no customer in their right mind would think, oh, we can do this ourselves. Right? I see this so often where, a new founding team come in and they're like, do it our way. This is way better, You have to change what you have done the last 3 years, but we know better, right? We come in and we're going to tell you, how to do things. And that's a recipe for a disaster, right? Solve something that is so hard to do that no technical team in an enterprise would embark on that. I could give you an example. New Vector was the Kubernetes security startup that we sold recently to SUSE, and we did inline network packet inspection for Kubernetes clusters, right? And
we don't even know what you're saying, but it sounds really cool.
Okay.
And so,
great. I worked a lot with that too.
And the first iteration of this was, banking customers, hospital customers taking on Kubernetes had to make sure that no private information was escaping their cloud, right? So social security numbers, bank records, patient records, etc. And the only way they could do that was to literally take all the network traffic, route it out of the cloud into a physical Cisco or F5 firewall, and then back in, right? Which was insane. But that was the protocol, right? If you handle, private information, you have to have a real firewall in place. And so we came in and did that basically as a Docker container. And we were never asked, or nobody would ever assume that they could do this on their own. Our problem was, of course, who are the customers and what's their use case and what are they doing today, and how do we sort of displace these old physical firewalls, right? But I think, back to you, Theis, of course, it's something like solve a small problem in a big market, but that problem has to be hard, because otherwise it's too easy for you to be sort of discarded.
So we sort of jumped to the next lesson already. I have one question for the first one. Is that when you say begin with the end, you talk about, hey, let's make sure this slice or product you make fits in to wherever, right? The other thing you also do there is you do think about who your exit could be, right? And do you narrow it down there? And are you ever concerned that, look, we're building this for Cisco, it's no secret? Did you ever do that? And is that a good idea?
Well, you should always build for a couple.
Yeah, exactly. That was sort of was my question, right?
I mean, that's just sound, betting and hedging, right? You shouldn't just go down one path, although sometimes you're forced to, right? And we're like, hey, I really only have one sort of obvious exit path, and so be it. Let's give it a go. But yeah, I mean, you sort of start not only to think about the technologies you need to integrate to, but also what are the companies behind that, and are they likely? Are they doing something similar in this space? You should think twice. Or are they sort of starting to get into like cloud native infrastructure like Kubernetes? Yeah, that's a good one, right? Then you can end up where I ended up at some point, with a potential Chinese buyer. And then because they were, running a large, sort of Amazon competitor in China. And we were fitting like hand in glove into what they wanted to do. Except we're an American company and they're a Chinese company, and all hell breaks loose if you do, network packet inspection for the Chinese. So literally China. Washington shut it down.
Okay, so that's something to be mindful. That might be a little bit of a narrow problem, but that can also happen, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
No, but that could easily happen when you only have one potential buyer, right? Then if for whatever reason, right? Maybe suddenly the global politics change, or maybe, like you say, they change strategy and actually decide to go into this area themselves. And suddenly Microsoft builds a browser, right? So so yeah, you gotta have at least a plan A and a B.
Yep.
Yeah, it's got to be obvious they want to buy it. It should be less obvious they actually want to build it themselves, right? That's what you're hoping for.
And you get invited to these sort of early conversations. The corporate development team will invite you over. There's a development team there. You can fairly quickly, if you listen to the kind of questions they ask you, decipher, are they just picking your brain because they're doing it themselves, or are they truly interested in sort of buying your technology and sort of, right?
This sounds like you've tried it. Have you gone to a meeting where you start drawing on a whiteboard, you realize, holy shit, I should stop drawing?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time. You got to be careful, but you also have to give enough that you're credible. It's a dance, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one we have here is, we're already into it, is solving a real problem. And it feels like that sort of there are a couple of things there. One of them being, hey, don't come in with a problem where you have to do all kinds of things. So you also sort of create a problem.
Yeah.
But also that the problem is big enough, right? That it's like, yeah, we're not going to build this ourselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, no question. And the easiest sort of litmus test for that is, are the customers willing to pay for it, right? And it comes back to, have a business case, have a sort of a commercial model in mind when you approach the first customer, right? This, we can talk about it later, but this sort of freemium idea in particular in enterprise software is I think a fallacy. You see it time and time again with open source projects. It comes from the goodness of the heart, but it ends up going nowhere because you can't find a way to monetize. And if you solve a big enough problem for a customer that needs it badly enough, of course they're going to pay for it. In fact, they might even tell you what it does for them, and you can sort of dial it in, right? The more sort of the more times you do this, you also realize that it's a lot easier if the person or the department whose problem you solve is also the same entity that has the budget to buy, and that's something that is hard learned, right? When there's too many cooks in the kitchen, they have different ideas. You are the fan of one team, but the enemy of another. It's usually a very tough sales motion. Like so having a much more narrow product that you solve a problem and they sit on the budget and they can buy it right there and then, that's the sort of the dream scenario.
Are you arguing for the simplicity of the product too, saying, no, we do this, nothing else, we're not going to mess with anything else?
Yeah, I think so. In particular in the early days, like the first sort of product market fit, narrow it down. Don't try to go too broad, because you're muddying the water. Solve a hard problem, go there, get your your first customers, and then you can start sort of adding on and expanding, and you have more credibility. But if you want to come in to a big organization, you got to keep it simple.
Comments on this, Theis?
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting because it's such a different world from the one you and I, Heine, are mainly navigating, right? Where really, like, it has been, let's give this stuff away for free, even because, these people are not even our customers and it's not even our business model and so on. So it's so interesting to hear these perspectives on selling into the enterprise and how you view them also as a strategic acquirer at some point.
And for most B2B, it's also true, right? That freemium is great. Freemium works really well, but enterprise maybe less so.
Yeah,
go ahead.
and yeah, I mean, if you solve a problem, the best way to test it out is are they paying for it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Cool. Let's move to the next lesson here. So the third key lesson here is buyers are looking for technology, talent, and proof, not revenue. So you're going to have to explain that you've been talking about revenue all along, and now you're saying you don't need it. So let's hear it.
You need enough that you're not just an idea. But even too much revenue can hamper an acquisition. And I talk from experience. We had with one of the companies that VMware bought over 1,000. I think we even had 1,500 customers. They were all there were no contracts. It was just an invoice. And you come into a publicly traded company that are like, we don't know what to do with this revenue and what kind of risk is involved. And we're like, there's no risk. I mean, they're all going to pay. They love us. But so too much can be a problem. It took a year to sort it out, actually. And too little is definitely a problem. But find a dozen customers that are paying a decent amount of money, and more importantly, are willing to take a call and saying, yeah, this is really good. It solves this problem for me. I wish two of you would talk. Right?
You're actually saying that someone like VMware, the difference between $1 million and $100,000 in revenue, it's almost like, holy shit, $1 million, it's just more work to do diligence on, but $100,000 shows that people are buying it, and that's fine.
Yeah,
or the million doesn't matter for the revenue anyway.
Right, and we were sort of in our average invoice was about $16,000, and we had 1,500 of those. So that becomes complicated when you don't have, and we didn't have a CFO, right? I mean, we barely had an accounting team, really. And so they put all that revenue aside, and it's not until the customers renew that they will recognize revenue out of caution. But if you have, like the other one we sold to VMware, we probably had a dozen customers total, but they were spending over 100,000 each of them. And that's enough, right?
Yeah.
For VMware to be like, yeah, there's something here. So
We'll take it.
yeah, we'll take it.
And so what is the reason they're buying? So what type of acquisition is this? Is it because they know they can sell 1 million of these once they bought it, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was just competitive pressure from Microsoft, right? They had it, now VMware has to go and get it. You end up typically in these large enterprise, software companies in this innovator's dilemma, where if you keep asking the customer, what do you want? They want a faster horse, right? Where some little startup will come in from the side and sort of rethink certain things. And so they're really interested in that, to disrupt potentially their own roadmap, come out with new innovative features that puts them ahead of the competition, or simply plug a hole. Really, I mean, that happens more often than not, that they're like, hey, we're behind on this integration piece here. That seems great. You come with products and customers and a team that know what they do. It's an easy decision for them. And so that's that's kind of where it's at. That's the sweet spot, right? And if you stick to the $25 to $75 million range, it's not that much money for the large guys
To keep the big business going.
Yep.
Are you saying it's hard for them to innovate?
Yeah, it becomes. I mean, oh my God! I mean, you realize it as you come into a 2-year sort of sentence where you have to sort of stay on board, right, and serve your time. How inefficient, an even iconic, software company can be inside, with processes, and they hire new people that come from older companies, and they think about innovation completely different. And you're just sort of like, what is this? This was my my icon. And inside, right, they're just in each other's way, fighting about stuff, and you're like, wow, okay. So
there is a reason why they get technology from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And Cisco was very much aware of that in the early days, that they had sort of stopped innovating and started to maintain an increment. And so they, part of John Chambers' strategy was to acquire companies to sort of shake things up. And yeah, I think they did well until they didn't.
Yeah. So, okay, we're gonna go to the next one here. So, and we've touched on this already. Let's make sure, like, you need to have a real business model from day one. And again, this is from our world. We would have a business model on a slide, but we wouldn't really have a business model. And the same goes for a lot of B2B, like early business. They would do like freemium and stuff. So this is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, Heini, when I met you the first time, Vino was just an idea, right? And it was free for all and la la la, but you had a very well articulated strategy for how to monetize, right? And it was there. It wasn't an effect yet, but you'd already thought it through, right? I remember you called it a push and a pull and something else. I'm like, all right, okay, good. And that's business to consumer. I think business to business is different, right? It's hard to have proof points if there's not money along the way. And one of the big sort of fallacies of a startup is that they have too much money and too much time, and they have the luxury of being in their own echo chamber for too long. And constantly sort of slapping each other on the back and reminding them how awesome
we won an award, we raised
without
money,
having
bang,
to
bang, bang.
face the market. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so a year and a half goes by, they're ready to launch the product, and they completely miss the boat. Right. And so I think it's changing. I think most startups now understand that sooner is better. And, even if it's just an MVP and you couple something together, put it out there early on. But you have these sort of scary examples of startups that raise a lot of money. They have all the time in the world to figure it out. They end up with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads and zero
exactly.
revenue, right?
Yeah.
And you're
I will say though that what was a problem for us in that relation was that we had a really, really clear business model, which we sold to the investors day one. Is, yep, we get this. This makes total sense. But the step from the slide to actually doing it was very, very different, right?
Hard.
So it's also risky to know really clearly what it's going to be without doing it. So my recommendation here would also be try early on to actually do it too. And for you, you always did it day one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Henrik, I have a question here on this one because I don't know if it's a pushback, but I'm wondering. So we're talking about, it's important to have a real business model from day one, and a business model is more than just the fact that you have a price tag on your software and that you have someone buying it. It's also about other stuff like unit economics. It's that makes sense. It's about having customer acquisition costs that make sense, and so on. Now, when you're building towards an exit, what we're often talking about is you are going to tuck this into a much larger company that has distribution power, right? They are able to take your technology, which you were able to sell to a few hundred customers, and they have 100,000, and they already have a process for that, and so on.
Yep.
So actually, in that case, that if the acquisition goes through, your business model is going to be impacted in a massively positive way because, for example, your customer acquisition cost is probably going to go way down. So my thinking is, isn't it then very tempting to kind of not think about that part of your business and not worry too much about like, I know we're spending way too much on getting customers, but that's going to be solved when we tuck into Cisco. So is that a pitfall, or how should we think about this?
Yeah, that's a good observation, Theis. I in my experience, I mean, that's all I can sort of like speak from. It the money talks, and they will take you serious in an acquisition conversation when their own customers have been spending $100,000 with a little startup, right? It is a check mark that is sort of legitimate, as opposed to a freemium or even an open source. I hate to say it, but that is.
So money talks. You're saying if people buy, it's real. I don't understand this product. You can talk about all these things you talked about earlier, but money talks.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. So the final note we have here, which is the interesting one, it's one of the interesting ones, is that VCs are not your friends, and in our world, they very much are. Otherwise, we can't build shit. So you disagree with that?
Well, not necessarily, right? But you need to know who you marry,
yes.
and you need to know the economics of a VC fund, and it starts from angel investors. What are they looking for? What's good for them? Pre-seed, seed, and then institutional investors, right? And more often than not, first-time founders have no clue about the economics of a
exactly.
right. And your first clue is that they call you a portfolio company. That should give you the first hint that they're looking at this from a sort of a top-down view, and they would rather let you fail, trying to reach $1 billion exit than letting you out early, right? And so I think the market, both the founders and the VCs, it's maturing over the last decade or so, and people are more open about that's the reality. But definitely, what's good for you individually is not necessarily good for the VC, and that's an inherent conflict that you need to be very much aware of early on, preferably before you sign.
And you said a key word here, I think, and you said the word portfolio, right? And the difference here really is that they have a portfolio of 20 and you have a portfolio of 1. So it's kind of important that with my portfolio of 1 as a founder, I do not fail. And they just don't think like that. Right? They think we can afford it, which means we can push the accelerator a little bit harder, right? So their interests are different there, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I keep saying this, if you're a founder and you still maintain like 10, 20% ownership of your company, and you get a $50 million acquisition offer, that's financially life-changing for you. The VCs couldn't care less. But if this is your first money that you're making, take it. Serve your sentence and then start a new company. I mean, just be completely rude about it, and what's good for you is good for you.
Yeah. So Henrik, is there a way to kind of marry these things? Who is the good investor for a company that you build for an early exit? Do they exist? How do you find them? What is that market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, most companies will need some kind of investment, right? Whether it's mom and dad or friends or whatever, right? That's kind of friends and family, but which I would strongly advise against, by the way. But there are angels, right? Like ourselves, that we know what we're doing, we know what we're getting ourselves into, and getting our money back, 5x, that's fine. It's not end all be all, but it's fine, right? So pre-seed funds, smaller funds in the 10, 20, $30 million range, they probably think it's fine too. But you need to, the problem here, of course, is as a founder, you always go for the moonshot, right? You will never start off thinking, oh, I'm going to sell this early. And so, and God forbid you say that to an investor, right? In particular, institutional, you're out the door before you finished your cup of coffee, right? So it's a bit of a dance, to know who you're letting in on your cap table. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think the problem is also what you said earlier, that people just don't know when they start out. They know that a success is raising a lot of money, and here we go. And the problem is, when you raise a seed round, maybe you raise an A round, you're already set now, because now you raised $10-15 million, and exit of 30, 40, 50 is off the table. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's not attractive for the VCs, not at all, right? They would rather have you die trying than giving up halfway.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to go on a short break. You're going to stay with us. Thank you for sharing so far, but we'll be back in 2 seconds. We are back, and Henrik, incredible insights here today, and some of them a little bit controversial because the playbook, the textbook, and so on, it's just, hey, you do it like this, and hopefully you can raise some money, and off goes the rocket. So the last question on all of this, before we get to the more standard stuff we have on here, is if a young founder comes to you now and says, hey, Henrik, I want to, you've done so well, give me some advice to what route should I be going here? How sort of locked in would you be and say, no, you go this way and you will be more likely to succeed than going to, what would you say to that younger founder?
Well, I mean, it's a hard question, right? Because the answer depends, of course. Where you're at, what are you doing? What's the potential of it? Have you done this before? Do you know what you're getting yourself into? And if it's a completely blank sheet, it's a question of do you let them fail and fall on their face, and be like, yeah, that's a part of the experience. We've all done that. Or do you try to sort of nudge them in the, hey, think about these things before you raise your funds, right? And quite often, first time founders come in with, larger than life, they know everything, and that's a part of the charm. And who are you to tell them, otherwise? So I think in particular, as I get older, you're sort of like, yeah, maybe they should just figure it out on their own.
Since you know so well anyway,
they will come back with.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, another strategy would be, Henrik, look, I just want to be a founder. I want to build something. And then you could sort of say to them, look, here are the things where I think it's easiest or easier, and go down this route. I mean, would you do that and say, look, here's what you need to do. Don't raise too much money.
Yeah.
Build B2B. Do this, do that, go. Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be afraid of sort of giving them the playbook and say, this actually is probably the shortest route to a potential exit.
No, you're not. Yeah.
That may not be what you set out to do, but sit down with a spreadsheet and prove me right.
Yeah, no, I think the spreadsheet is a really good point, because most founders don't do that, right? You don't sit down and really optimize for yourself. What is the best thing for you?
Exactly.
What do you think, Theis? If you were 22, you still look 22, but if you were 22, what would you do?
If I would, I think what Henrik says makes a lot of sense. I think passion is very, very important in a founder, because they have to work on this every day for many more days than they ever thought. And so if it's not something that fundamentally interests them and they can be passionate about, then it doesn't really matter. So I think if then whatever playbook I have doesn't fit with their passion, right? If they are passionate about something, for example, in a B2C space where this playbook, is not as good, I wouldn't tell them to kind of change over to this thing. Like go for it. You're passionate. Plus, they're young. They don't even listen anyways to whatever advice I give. So it doesn't really matter. They're going to go do whatever the hell they want to do anyways.
That's why we love the young people.
Yeah. And I think, startup founders are the good ones are like cockroaches, and they'll find a way to survive and get through it and kind of learn from all these hardships. So I don't know. Giving them some advice is good, but they need to fundamentally work within an area where they have passion. Otherwise, everything else goes away.
Right. And you can, to that point, Theis, I mean, you can help them out, look over a term sheet and be like, yo, this you should never sign up for, or, there are some hard lessons that, they don't have to learn on their own, that you could be like, this is nasty. So don't sign up for that. Right. But
and you can be very specific around
absolutely
that.
Right.
Yeah.
Let them get on their journey.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Now we're getting to the most important segment here, obviously, is what are you obsessed with right now, Henrik? And I think you're going to get to start today. What do you got, Henrik?
As you know, Heini, because you've been here many times, I live in an off-grid house in Napa Valley, and so I have become quite the tree hugger in my olden days. And so I'm always obsessed with what's the next thing I can innovate around being off the grid. How do I get myself an EV where my only source of power is solar panels, right? And so how does that actually really going to work practically on a day-to-day basis? But also, with my current startup, Spio, right? We're collecting a lot of agricultural and economic data, and so how does that fit into the sustainability of the world, and how do we use data to maximize the output but minimize the sort of the impact on the environment. Is really something that I'm passionate about right now.
Thank you. And it's an amazing place up on the ridge there, Rosendahl's Ridge. So a question on that, because I know you couldn't get an EV because there just isn't enough power in your power source, right? Did you ever get an EV? Can you drive an EV now, or what's happening?
No, we're down to raw physics, right? An EV will use about one kilowatt hour will be about a third of a mile, right? And so thankfully we're in California and there's a lot of sunshine, but 50 new panels and a whole day of sunshine is what it takes for me to get to San Francisco and to Napa and back, right? Yeah, so it's a little impractical. While it might be cute to drive around and saying this car has been charged entirely by sunshine, it's sort of more of a statement rather than a practical solution. But at some point we'll get there, and I think that's I can't stop thinking about these things. Like when my batteries are full, which they are at 11 o'clock in the morning, right? What do I do with all this excess power? How do I leverage that? How do I turn that into hot water? How do I turn that into pumping from the well? And it's called demand response now, where you basically place different workloads at different times of the day. That's kind of fun.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. And you have batteries too. Like how big are the batteries?
I have 7,000 pounds of lead acid batteries in a shed. And people always ask me, so why don't you have Tesla batteries? And I'm like, look, those big guys, they are the same as equivalent as 8 Tesla batteries. And they're tried and true, and there's way too much technology on a Tesla battery that I don't really need when I'm completely off grid and don't have to sell the power back to the grid. So yeah, in many ways, old school.
Well, yes, but there's also like an iPad on the wall that shows how much battery's in there.
Of
Are you
course.
generating a regen, whatever you're. So it's
course.
cool.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you are a nerd after all, right?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Theis, what do you say?
Oh, what I'm passionate about these days. Well, it actually goes back to what we talked about before about helping other founders. I'm part of I'm a business mentor in a program in Denmark called InnoFounder, which is this kind of state powered incubator where people get on the program. They basically get a 1 year salary, pretty low salary, but you can pay the bills if you don't have too many of them. And then it lets them focus on their startup. And I'm associated as a business mentor, helping them out. And it's hugely fascinating. It allows me to just look at very, very different startups in many different businesses, completely different from some of the things I've done. So that's super fascinating. And one of the really fun things right now is that it's the end of the summer break. And, obviously as a founder, you haven't had a summer break. But still, maybe they went to a festival and they, and they just discharged a bit, which means that now they come back and they're pretty panicked because they're halfway through the program. Oh my God, I just wasted a month. I didn't do anything. And so everything is broken. So, and that's actually one of the places where, back to your point, Henrik, there are things that you can, even if they listen or not, there are some of those things where like general advice about, how to focus and how to get things done. And also to make sure that they keep the perspective on things, that they don't panic about these things, that they just like work through it. There are things actually that I feel like I can give them that is somewhat useful. So that's for me super nice way to spend some time on these startups.
Are they good? Are the young founders, are they good? Are they motivated? They're not good yet necessarily, but are they motivated?
All my founders are amazing. I know.
Oh, I believe you.
The others in the program are shit, but mine are amazing.
Yours became amazing after that.
Yes, they were shit.
But now they're great.
No. It's a mixed bag. Honestly, Heini, it's a mixed bag, and it's super interesting. And also all these different constellations. I have single founder teams. I have mixed teams, and so on. It's interesting to see the dynamics and just how different people are and how different they are from me and how they attack things. So it's
cool.
For me. It's quite inspirational.
Yeah. So I'm going to be a little bit boring on this one, but it's something that happens here in Copenhagen every single year, and it's when the big tech conference comes to town. Tech Barbecue is this week, so it is quite a fun week, I must say, here, because like hundreds of investors come to town, founders from all over the world, and a lot of, even if you don't spend that much time on this venue, everyone's in town. Mm-hmm. I quite enjoy that, so it's a good week. I know, Theis, you're going to. Henrik, have you ever been to Tech Barbecue?
I have, in the early days.
Yeah, it's very different now, I will say. And the one thing I'm going to get out of here is an idea. And other conferences do this, but Tech Barbecue, I'm going to talk to the guys that run it and ask them to make sure that we have a podcast stage next year, because we should obviously have a podcast stage where we record startup podcasts and whatever
live from the conference. Yeah, that would be great.
Exactly right. That has to happen next year. So I'm going to do some lobby work and see if we can make that happen till next year.
To that effect. Another thing that I've started looking into is this notion of picks and shovels, right? Because there are, every day there are 10 new AI and ML startups, right? And whatever their big invention is. And it leads me to believe that there might actually be some serious money made if you provide the picks and shovels for them. Just like the gold rush, right? Where people with hardware stores usually made a lot more money than the gold diggers themselves. Yeah. And so it might be slightly cynical to look at it that way, but on the other hand, somebody's going to do it.
Yeah. At least for a small exit.
Yep.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of money being made in renting out those A100 chips to all these companies. Yes, that's a massive business right now.
Yep.
Cool. We've come to the end of another episode of Founders Weekly. Thank you very much, Theis, and thank you very much for coming on, Henrik.
Okay, thanks. Great to be here.
Please make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review and rating. It really helps. For those of you on YouTube, check out Raw Startup, where you'll find a lot of video about how to build a startup. This has been Founders Weekly. Now stop listening, go build something.